subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. The morning air still carried the chill of early autumn when Derek Hanna stepped on his front porch, coffee mug in hand. 15 years as a combat medic had taught him to appreciate quiet moments like these, the kind that came before the chaos. His modest two-story home sat on the edge of a working-class neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, where houses were close enough that you knew your neighbors whether you wanted to or not. He was 42, lean and weathered, with hands that had held together more broken bodies than he cared to count. The kind of hands that moved with precision whether they were starting in 4-line under fire or helping his wife Christine tend to their small vegetable garden. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and more field hospitals than he could remember had left their mark, not in trauma, but in a quiet competence that radiated from him. "Dad, you're going to be late." Marianne called from inside, her voice carrying that particular tone of exasperation that only a 17-year-old daughter could perfect. She appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had Christine's eyes and his stubborn chin, and she was heading into her senior year with college applications looming. "I'm always on time," Derek said, taking a final sip of coffee. "You're just always early." She rolled her eyes but smiled. Behind her, 14-year-old June bounded down the stairs, all energy and chaos, nearly tripping over the family dog in her hurry. "Can't be late for the first week," June announced, though it was actually Thursday. Christine emerged, already in her nursing scrubs, kissing Derek on the cheek. "I've got the late shift tonight. There's chicken in the fridge for dinner." "I'll handle it," Derek said. He worked as a civilian emergency medical instructor now, training paramedics and EMTs at the regional medical center. The pay wasn't military, but the hours were better, and it kept his skills sharp. He'd also picked up shifts at the local urgent care clinic on weekends, not because they needed the money desperately, but because he couldn't seem to stop being what he was. As the girls climbed into Christine's sedan, Derek noticed Wallace Spencer next door, standing on his porch with his arms crossed. The Spencer house was a mirror of theirs, but where the Hannas kept their lawn neat and their paint fresh, the Spencer's place showed years of neglect. Wallace was in his late 50s, thick-necked and red-faced, the kind of man who wore anger like a second skin. "Hannah," Wallace grunted, neither greeting nor acknowledgement, just his name spat out like an accusation. Derek nodded once, neutral. They'd never been friends, but there'd been a time when they were at least civil. That had changed about 2 years ago when Derek had called the police after witnessing Wallace drunkenly shoving his wife into the house. The charges hadn't stuck, but the resentment had. Wallace's 4 sons still lived at home, all adults, now ranging from their early to mid-20s. Terrence, the oldest at 26, had his father's build and temper. Greg and Casey were 24 and 23, respectively, cut from the same cloth. Bernard, the youngest at 21, seemed softer around the edges, but Derek had learned in combat that the quietest ones could be the most dangerous. None of them worked regular jobs. They came and went at odd hours, and Derek had his suspicions about what kept them busy, but he kept his head down and focused on his family. He'd seen enough conflict for one lifetime. That philosophy lasted until Thursday evening. Derek was grading papers at the kitchen table when his phone buzzed. Christine's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, I'm leaving work in 10. Mom. June's voice panicked in the background. "Derek." Christine's voice went sharp, professional, the tone she used in trauma situations. "Marianne's hurt. We're at the house. You need to come now." He was moving before she finished, grabbing his keys and his medical bag, the one he always kept stocked, habit from the service. His truck roared to life, and he made the normally 15-minute drive in 8, his mind cycling through possibilities, forcing himself to stay calm. The Spencer boys' pickup was parked at an angle in their driveway, music thumping from inside the house. Derek's jaw tightened as he pulled in. Inside, he found Marianne on the couch, June beside her holding her hand. Christine was on the phone with someone, her face pale. When Derek saw his daughter's face, something cold and ancient activated in the back of his mind. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, already purpling. Her lip was split, blood crusted at the corner. There were finger-shaped bruises forming on her upper arms, defensive marks. Her shirt was torn at the collar. "Baby," he said softly, kneeling beside her, slipping automatically into assessment mode, even as rage built like pressure behind his ribs. "Can you tell me what hurts?" "Dad," she whispered, then burst into tears. Christine ended her call. "I've talked to the police. They're sending someone." June spoke up, voice shaking. "I saw it. I saw what happened." Derek looked at his younger daughter, and she flinched at whatever she saw in his eyes. He forced himself to breathe, to soften. "Tell me." Mary Ann was getting the mail. All four of them were outside, working on that truck. Terrence said something to her, something gross. She told him to shut up. He followed her to our porch. June's voice cracked. He grabbed her arm. She pulled away. Then they all came over. They were laughing while they... Mary Ann sobbed harder. Christine pulled her close. "Did they?" Derek couldn't finish the question. "They shoved her around," June said. "Called her names. Hit her." Terrence slapped her hard. Greg pushed her down. I started screaming and ran to get Mom, and they just laughed and went back to their house. Derek stood slowly. Through the front window, he could see the Spencer house. Lights on, shadows moving inside. "Where are you going?" Christine asked, but she knew. "To talk to Wallace." "Derek, wait for the police." "I'm going to talk," he said, and meant it. He'd spent 15 years learning control, learning when to act and when to wait. But he was also his daughter's father. He crossed the two lawns. The music from inside was louder, aggressive rap about violence and women. He knocked once hard. Wallace opened the door, beer in hand. Behind him, the four brothers lounged in the living room, watching TV. When Terrence saw Derek, he smiled, a slow, nasty grin. "Your boys just assaulted my daughter," Derek said, his voice level. Wallace belched. She probably had it coming, dressing the way she does. The cold thing in Derek's mind took note of that response, filed it away. "I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing," Derek continued. "Have them come out and apologize. Take responsibility. Before the police get here." Wallace laughed, a wet, phlegmy sound. "You're gonna make them, soldier boy? You ain't in your sandbox anymore. This is my property, and my boys don't apologize to lying bitches." Behind him, the brothers laughed. Derek looked past Wallace, meeting each son's eyes in turn. Terrence was still smiling. Greg was red-faced, amped up. Casey looked nervous but defiant. Bernard watched quietly from the back, face unreadable. "Then we'll let the law handle it," Derek said, and turned away. "That's right, walk away," Terrence called after him. "Just like you'll walk away when nothing happens. You think the cops care about some girl getting what she deserved?" Derek kept walking, but his hands were shaking, and it wasn't from fear. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, both young, one barely looking old enough to shave. They took statements, photographed Mary Ann's injuries, knocked on the Spencer door. Wallace answered, sober enough now to be careful, and called his lawyer. The boys all claimed they'd been inside all evening, hadn't touched anyone, and that if Mary Ann Hannah had injuries, she must have gotten them somewhere else. June's testimony as a witness helped, but the lead officer, a man named Morrison, was apologetic when he pulled Derek aside. "I believe your daughter, Mr. Hannah, but it's 4 against 1 witness, and your younger daughter is family. A decent lawyer will tear this apart. They'll claim bias, say she's protecting her sister, without more evidence. What about the bruises? The injuries? Consistent with assault, yes, but they'll say she got into a fight somewhere else, that she's lying to get them in trouble." Morrison's face showed frustration. "I've dealt with the Spencer family before. They know how to work the system. I'll file the report, press charges, but I want you to be realistic about how this will play out." After they left, Derek sat with Christine and the girls. Mary Ann cried until she had no tears left. June was angry, demanding justice. Christine held them both, looking at Derek over their heads. "We'll get through this," she said, but her eyes asked a question. Derek nodded, but as he went upstairs to his study, the small room where he kept his books and his memories, he wasn't thinking about getting through it. He was thinking about anatomy. When he'd trained as a combat medic, they'd learned 2 parallel tracks. One was how to save lives, where to apply pressure, how to stop bleeding, which interventions could buy time until surgical help arrived. The other track was darker, though they never called it that. It was understanding what the body needed to survive, which meant understanding what it couldn't survive without. Pressure points, nerve clusters, the precise angles where bones were most vulnerable. In combat, that knowledge had saved countless lives. He'd reached into shattered bodies and put them back together through sheer will and skill. He'd never used that knowledge the other way. He never needed to. Derek pulled out his old medical texts, the ones he'd kept from training, plus the newer ones he used for teaching. He opened his laptop and began researching. Not just anatomy, but law, criminal procedures, evidence requirements. He read about assault cases, about how they played out in court, about conviction rates. Morrison had been right. The case was weak. Even if it went to trial, a decent lawyer would shred it. The Spencer brothers would walk away laughing, and his daughter would have to see them every day, living next door, knowing they'd gotten away with it. Derek closed his eyes and breathed. He'd never been an impulsive man. The military had trained that out of him, replaced it with systematic thinking, planning, preparation. In field hospitals, hesitation killed. But so did recklessness. He thought about his daughters, about Christine, about the life they'd built here. Then he thought about Terrence Spencer's smile. He opened his eyes and kept reading. Over the next 3 days, Derek watched. He maintained his normal routine, taught his classes, came home, had dinner with his family. Marianne was seeing a therapist now, and the physical bruises were fading, but there was a wariness in her eyes that broke his heart. She flinched at loud noises. She didn't want to go outside alone. The police had indeed charged the Spencer brothers, but they bonded out within hours. They went about their business as if nothing had happened. In fact, they seemed emboldened. When Derek was outside, they'd make comments just loud enough to hear. "Nice night for a walk, but some people should be careful," Terrence called once. "Yeah, never know what might happen," Greg added, laughing. Derek ignored them, but he noted everything. Their schedules, their habits, their vulnerabilities. The Spencer property had a privacy fence in the back, high and solid. Their garage was detached at the far end of the driveway. Wallace worked nights at a warehouse 3 times a week. The boys liked to drink on their back patio, music loud enough that neighbors had complained. On the 4th day, Julian Jones showed up. Julian had served with Derek during his second tour in Iraq, a special forces medic who'd rotated through their field hospital for advanced trauma training. They'd stayed in touch over the years, and Julian had moved to Richmond 6 months ago, working as a consultant for a private security firm. But his real value had always been his mind. Julian was a tactical thinker, the kind of man who could look at a situation and see 17 different solutions, then pick the one that achieved maximum effect with minimum exposure. He was also the only person Derek had called after that first night. They met at a coffee shop downtown, far from the neighborhood. Julian listened as Derek explained everything, his expression never changing. "You're thinking about doing something," Julian said when Derek finished. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about making sure they never do this again. To anyone. The legal system will fail. You know it. I know it. I've seen it fail before." Julian nodded slowly. "If you're asking me to help, I need to know what you have in mind." Derek pulled out a notebook. Over the past days, he'd been making plans, running scenarios. "I need to do this legally defensible, or as close as possible. Self-defense. Defense of others. But they need to understand, truly understand what they did. You're talking about hurting them. I'm talking about teaching them. Using the same anatomy lessons I used to save lives, but in reverse. Causing maximum pain with minimal permanent damage. Making them beg to die, then letting them live with the memory." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "That's dark, brother. They beat my daughter." "I know." Julian's jaw tightened. "I've got a daughter too. If it was her." He trailed off. "What do you need?" "Information. Planning. And someone make sure I don't cross a line I can't come back from." They spent the next 2 hours going over details. Julian's firm had access to resources, surveillance equipment, databases, legal contacts. He could help Derek gather information and prepare. But they both knew this was Derek's operation. "There's another factor," Julian said as they prepared to leave. "Wallace Spencer. He's not going to take this lying down if you hurt his sons." "I know. That's why it has to be perfect. It has to be legal, or at least legally defensible. And it has to send a message clear enough that he won't retaliate. Julian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've changed since the service. No, Derek said. I've just been given a reason to use what I learned. That night, Derek had dinner with his family. Marianne was trying to return to normal, but she barely ate. June was subdued. Christine kept looking at him, trying to read his face. After the girls went upstairs, Christine took his hand. What are you planning? She asked. Planning? Derek, I've been married to you for 19 years. I know when you're in mission mode. I've seen that look before when you'd come back from deployment and have to testify at hearings or deal with bureaucracy. You're building something in your head. He could have lied, should have lied to protect her. But Christine had been an Army nurse when they met. She'd seen combat, understood sacrifice and necessity in ways that civilians never would. The case is going to fall apart, he said. Morrison called me today. The Spencer family lawyer is already poking holes. There's talk of a plea deal for misdemeanor charges, maybe probation. Christine's face went hard. For what they did to Marianne, June's testimony isn't enough. They're claiming bias, family loyalty. And Marianne, he took a breath. The lawyer is going to paint her as a troubled teen who got into a fight with a boyfriend or classmates. They'll drag her through the mud. So what are you going to do? He looked at his wife, this woman who'd held him together through PTSD, who'd raised their daughters while he was deployed, who'd never once asked him to be anything other than what he was. I'm going to make sure they understand what happens when you hurt my family, he said. But I need you to trust me. And I need you and the girls to be somewhere else when it happens. She studied his face for a long time. Then she nodded. My sister in Atlanta. I was planning to take the girls there for a long weekend anyway. Let Marianne get away from here for a bit. We'll go this Friday. That's perfect. Derek. She gripped his hand tighter. I meant what I said at our wedding. For better or worse. But you have to come back from whatever this is. Our girls need their father. I will, he promised. This isn't about revenge. It's about protection. About making sure they never hurt anyone again. After she went to bed, Derek stayed up late, refining his plan. Julian had provided surveillance photos, confirming the Spencer boys' patterns. Thursday nights, when Wallace worked, all four brothers would be home, usually drinking in the garage or backyard. The neighborhood was quiet, houses spread apart. The Spencer's property had that high privacy fence, good sound insulation. Derek knew anatomy. He knew precisely where to strike to cause maximum pain with minimum permanent damage. The body had hundreds of pain receptors, nerve clusters that could be stimulated to create agony without leaving significant marks. The trick was combining that knowledge with the appearance of legitimate self-defense. He needed them to come to him, to threaten him or his property in a way that justified his response. And he needed to do it in a way that would terrify them so completely that neither they nor their father would ever consider retaliating. By 3 a.m, he had his plan. Friday morning, Derek drove Christine and the girls to the airport. Marianne hugged him tight at the security line. I love you, Dad, she whispered. I love you too, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay. He watched them disappear into the terminal, then drove back to the empty house. Julian was waiting in the kitchen. You sure about this? Julian asked. I've never been more sure of anything. Then let's set the stage. They worked through the day. Julian installed small cameras around Derek's property, hidden but positioned to capture everything. He also set up a system in Derek's study that would record and back up all footage automatically, uploaded to a secure cloud server in real time. If things go wrong, Julian explained, you'll have evidence. And if they go right, you'll have proof of whatever they did to provoke you. Nothing's going to go wrong, Derek said, but he was grateful for the backup. That evening, as the sun set, Derek prepared. He changed into old clothes, dark and nondescript. He set up his study like a field hospital, his medical bag open, supplies laid out with military precision. Trauma shears, forceps, hemostats, tourniquets, and pressure bandages. Syringes filled with various analgesics and sedatives, though he didn't plan to use those unless absolutely necessary. Then he added the other tools. A collapsible baton, military grade, zip ties, and his knowledge, the most dangerous weapon of all. At 9 o'clock, right on schedule, he heard the Spencer brothers in their backyard. Music started up, voices loud and aggressive. He could smell the beer from his kitchen window. Julian called. They're drinking. Wallace's truck just left. He's headed to work. Are you ready? Ready. Remember, you need them to come to you. Make it defensible. I know. Derek hung up and walked into his backyard. The Spencer property was clearly visible over the fence. He turned on his back porch light and moved around, making sure they could see him. It didn't take long. Hey, Hannah. Terrence's voice, slurred and aggressive. Heard your wife left you. Guess she got tired of your bullshit too. Derek ignored him, going about his business, checking his grill as if planning to cook something. I'm talking to you. Terrence yelled. You too good to answer? Leave me alone, Terrence. Derek called back, his tone deliberately mild. I don't want trouble. Trouble? We ain't trouble. Your lying daughter is trouble. More laughter from the others. Derek went inside, heart steady, breathing controlled. He'd learned patience in the military, how to wait for the right moment. 20 minutes later, he heard them in his front yard. He watched from a dark window. All four brothers, drunk and emboldened, were standing by his truck. Terrence had a baseball bat. Showtime. Derek activated his phone's video recorder and stepped outside. Get off my property, he said, loud and clear. Or what? Terrence advanced, bat raised. You gonna call the cops? They didn't do shit before. They won't do shit now. I'm warning you. Leave now, and we'll call this done. We're just getting started. Terrence swung the bat at Derek's truck windshield. The glass shattered with a crash that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. That was the provocation he needed. Clear, recorded, undeniable. Derek moved forward, hands visible. Stop. You're destroying my property. Greg grabbed him from the side. Let's finish what we started with your daughter, old man. And that was the threat. What happened next took 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Though later Derek would barely remember the sequence. His body shifted into combat mode, every movement trained and precise. Greg reached for him, and Derek caught his arm, his thumb finding the radial nerve at the wrist. He pressed hard, and Greg screamed, his entire arm going electric with agony. Derek swept his leg, dropping him face first into the driveway. Then his knee found the soft spot behind Greg's knee, the popliteal fossa. Another nerve cluster. Another scream. Casey charged next. Derek sidestepped, drove his elbow into Casey's solar plexus. Not hard enough to cause real damage, but enough to empty his lungs and drop him gasping. Then his fingers found the pressure point below Casey's ear, the mastoid process, and pressed. Casey's eyes rolled back. Bernard came at him with a knife. Derek's training kicked in, disarm, control, neutralize. He caught Bernard's wrist, twisted, heard the satisfying pop of a dislocated thumb. The knife clattered away. Then Derek's hand found a cluster of nerves in Bernard's armpit, squeezed, and Bernard collapsed, his entire arm useless. Terrence with the bat was last, and he was the one Derek had been waiting for. The ringleader, the one who'd hurt Marianne. Terrence swung the bat. Derek moved inside the arc, letting it pass harmlessly, and his fist drove into Terrence's floating ribs, precise, controlled, just enough to crack but not break. Terrence folded. Derek caught him as he fell, lowered him to the ground, and then began his lesson. You want to know what I learned? Derek said softly, his voice cold and clinical. Let me show you. His fingers found the intercostal nerves between Terrence's ribs, pressed, and manipulated them. Terrence's scream was primal, animal. Derek moved to the next cluster, methodical, a surgeon working in reverse. The supraorbital nerve above the eye, the infraorbital below, the mental nerve at the chin. Each touch precise, each pressure point calculated for maximum pain, minimum damage. Please, Terrence sobbed. Please stop. Did you stop when my daughter asked? Derek's voice was conversational, almost gentle. He moved to Terrence's hands, finding the spaces between the metacarpals, the nerve bundles that controlled sensation. More pressure, more pain. Around him, the other three were trying to crawl away, but their bodies weren't responding. Derek had been careful. Nerve pain was temporary, would fade, but the memory would last forever. He worked for 3 minutes more, making sure each brother understood, making sure they'd never forget. At one point, Greg started begging to die. The pain so intense, he couldn't think beyond it. No, Derek said. You're going to live. You're going to remember this. And you're never going to touch another person in anger again. When he finally stopped, all four Spencer brothers were conscious but broken, tears and snot streaming down their faces. None of them could stand. Derek pulled out his phone and called 911. This is Derek Hanna, 4247 Oakmont Drive. 4 men just attacked me on my property with a weapon. They're injured and need medical attention. Then he called Julian. It's done. Cameras got everything. Every second. Crystal clear. They came onto your property, destroyed your truck, made threats. One had a knife. You defended yourself. It's all documented. Good. The ambulance arrived in 23 minutes. By then, Derek was sitting on his porch steps, hands visible, waiting calmly. The paramedics, 2 he'd trained himself, stared at the scene in confusion. 4 grown men, all crying, all unable to stand, but with no obvious major injuries beyond some bruising and 1 dislocated thumb. What happened? The lead paramedic asked. They attacked me, Derek said simply. I defended myself. The police arrived minutes later. Morrison was among them, and his eyes widened as he took in the scene. Mr. Hanna? They came onto my property, broke my windshield with a bat, threatened me. One had a knife. I have video evidence. I defended myself using minimal necessary force. They're all conscious and breathing. No major injuries, though I'd recommend they be evaluated for soft tissue trauma and nervous system shock. Morrison looked at the 4 Spencer brothers, still whimpering on the ground, then at Derek, who didn't have a scratch on him. You did this? All 4. I was a combat medic for 15 years, officer. I know how to handle myself. It took 3 hours to sort out. The video evidence was damning. Clear footage of the Spencers coming onto Derek's property, Terrence destroying the windshield, Greg and the others making explicit threats, Bernard pulling a knife. Derek's response, while brutal, was technically within the bounds of self-defense. He'd used his training to neutralize threats without causing permanent damage. By midnight, all 4 Spencer brothers were in the hospital under observation and under arrest. Derek was released without charges after giving his statement. Julian met him back at the house. You're clear, Julian confirmed. Clear-cut case of self-defense. If anything, you'll probably be praised for your restraint. You could have killed them, but you didn't. Derek nodded, but he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about Marianne, about the fear in her eyes, and about how these 4 would never put that fear in anyone else's eyes again. There's one more thing, Julian said quietly. Wallace Spencer is going to come back tomorrow. He's going to find out what happened to his sons, and he's not going to take it well. I know, Derek said. I'm counting on it. The next morning, Derek was drinking coffee on his porch when Wallace's truck roared into the driveway next door. The older man climbed out, face red with fury, and marched straight over. What did you do to my boys? He roared. Derek set down his coffee. They attacked me. I defended myself. The police have all the evidence. Your sons are facing charges for assault, destruction of property, and assault with a deadly weapon. They'll be lucky if they only get probation. Bullshit. They're in the hospital. They can't even walk. Nervous system trauma, Derek said calmly. It's temporary. They'll recover fully in a few days. I made sure of that, because unlike them, I know exactly how much damage to cause without crossing the line into permanent injury. Wallace's fists clenched. You're going to pay for this. Derek stood slowly, and something in his posture made Wallace take a step back. No, Wallace, you're all going to pay. Your sons are going to be charged. My lawyer is filing civil suits for my daughter's injuries and trauma, for my property damage, and for emotional distress. Between legal fees and settlements, you're going to be bankrupt. And every time you think about retaliating, you're going to remember that I could have killed your sons last night. I could have ended them and called it self-defense, and I would have been legally justified. But I didn't, because I wanted them to live with what they did. I wanted them to remember every single day that there are consequences. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. And if you or your sons ever come near my family again, if I see you so much as look in their direction, I won't stop at pain. I will end you, all of you, and I'll do it so cleanly, so precisely, that no one will ever question whether it was justified. Do you understand me? Wallace's face had gone from red to pale. He looked at Derek and saw something that terrified him more than the threat. He saw absolute certainty. This wasn't a man making idle promises. This was someone who had calculated exactly what he could do and was prepared to do it. "We're moving," Wallace said finally, his voice shaking. "Getting out of this neighborhood. Far away from you and your crazy family." "Good idea," Derek said. "I'd recommend Florida. I hear Tampa is nice this time of year." Wallace turned and practically ran back to his house. Julian, who'd been watching from inside, came out onto the porch. "Think he'll actually leave?" "He will. Men like Wallace are bullies, and bullies understand one thing: greater force. He knows now that I'm willing and able to destroy his sons, and he can't protect them from me. He'll run. And the criminal charges against his sons? They'll plead out, probably get probation, maybe some jail time if the DA pushes hard. Either way, they're marked now. They'll think twice before hurting anyone else." "You did good, brother." Derek shook his head. "I did what I had to do. There's a difference." Christine and the girls came home that evening. Marianne saw the broken windshield first, then noticed Derek's scraped knuckles. "Dad, what happened?" He told them everything, with Christine's arm around his waist. When he finished, Marianne was crying again, but this time it was different. "You protected me," she whispered. "Always," he said. "Always." That night, as Derek lay in bed next to Christine, he thought about what he'd done. He'd used his training, his knowledge of the human body, to cause pain. He'd crossed lines that most people never even approached. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat if his family was threatened. "No regrets?" Christine asked in the darkness. "None," he said, "but I hope I never have to do something like that again." "Me too." They fell asleep, holding hands, while next door, the for sale sign went up on the Spencer property 3 days later. The weeks that followed felt like déjà vu in reverse. The neighborhood slowly returning to normal, even as everything had fundamentally changed. Derek continued teaching his classes, but word had spread about what happened. Some of his students looked at him differently now, with more respect, or maybe more wariness. He was fine with either. The Spencer brothers were released from the hospital after 4 days. The doctors couldn't find anything definitively wrong with them. No broken bones, no damaged organs, just persistent nerve pain that gradually faded. But the psychological impact was clear. When they walked out to their father's truck, they moved like beaten dogs, heads down, shoulders hunched. Derek watched from his classroom window at the medical center, having taken a personal day to observe from a distance. Julian had tipped him off about the release time. "You should have seen them in the hospital," Julian said over the phone. "The nurses said they barely talked, kept flinching at sudden movements. Your work left an impression." "That was the point," Derek replied. The criminal case proceeded swiftly. With the video evidence so damning, the Spencer brothers' lawyer recommended a plea deal. They'd each plead guilty to assault and destruction of property, get 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory anger management classes. It wasn't as much as Derek wanted, but it was something. More importantly, it was on their records now. Any future violation would carry enhanced penalties. The civil suit was where Derek planned to really hurt them. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Diana Kaiser who specialized in personal injury cases, was building a case for substantial damages. The medical bills, therapy costs, emotional trauma, Diana explained during their consultation, plus property damage and punitive damages for their behavior. "We're looking at potentially $200,000 or more. And given their financial situation, it'll bankrupt them." "Good," Christine said from beside Derek. She'd become fiercer since the attack, more protective. "They need to understand there are consequences beyond a slap on the wrist." The deposition was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life continued. Marian started seeing her therapist twice a week. The physical bruises had faded completely, but the psychological ones ran deeper. She had nightmares sometimes, waking up gasping. She was afraid to be alone outside. But slowly, with professional help and family support, she was healing. One evening, she came downstairs while Derek was reviewing case files for his teaching. "Dad, can we talk?" He closed the folder immediately. "Always." She sat across from him, fidgeting with her hands. "I've been thinking about what you did. How you hurt them. Derek's heart sank. He'd known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it. Marianne, no, let me finish. She took a breath. Part of me feels like I should be upset. Like violence isn't the answer, like there should have been another way. That's what my therapist keeps hinting at, you know? Finding healthy ways to process trauma. Your therapist is right. But the other part of me, Marianne continued, her voice strengthening, is glad, is relieved. Because when I sleep now, when I have nightmares, I remember that they're scared too. That they learned what happens when you hurt someone. And that makes me feel safer. Does that make me a bad person? Derek reached across and took her hand. No, sweetheart. It makes you human. We're taught that violence is always wrong, that there's always a better way. But sometimes the world doesn't work like that. Sometimes bad people only understand one language. What I did, I'm not proud of the violence itself, but I'm proud that I protected you. That I made sure they'll never hurt you or anyone else again. Mom said you were in combat mode. That you did what you were trained to do. I did. But here's the thing, Marianne. I used my training to cause pain, yes. But I was also careful. Precise. I didn't cause permanent damage because I didn't want to become like them. I wanted to teach them, not destroy them. There's a difference. She thought about that. Mr. Morrison, the police officer, he came by school yesterday. He wanted to check on me. He said what you did was legally justified, but that it was also the most controlled use of force he'd ever seen. He said most people in your situation would have just killed them. He's not wrong, but you didn't, even though you could have, even though they deserved it. She looked up at him with Christine's eyes. That's what makes you different from them, isn't it? You had the power to do more damage, but you chose not to. They didn't give me that choice. Derek felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. You're wise beyond your years, you know that? I get it from my dad. She smiled slightly. I'm still processing everything. The therapist says it'll take time. But I wanted you to know, I don't blame you for what you did. I'm grateful. After she went back upstairs, Christine emerged from the kitchen where she'd been listening. She's going to be okay, Christine said. I know. She's stronger than both of us. She gets that from her father, too. 2 weeks before the deposition was scheduled, Derek got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Hanna? A young man's voice, hesitant. Speaking. This is Bernard Spencer. Derek's grip tightened on the phone. If this is some kind of threat. No, nothing like that. I wanted to apologize. For what we did to your daughter. For everything. Derek sat down slowly. Go on. What you did to us. What you did to me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The pain it was beyond anything I'd imagined. But it was more than that. You could have killed us. You had every right. But you didn't. You let us live with what we'd done. And Bernard's voice cracked slightly. And I realize now that we deserved it. What we did to Marianne was evil. We were drunk and stupid, and we thought we were untouchable because we'd gotten away with stuff before. But you showed us we weren't. You showed us there are consequences. Derek waited, saying nothing. I know this doesn't change anything, Bernard continued. I know we're still going to be charged, still going to have to pay for what we did. But I wanted you to know, at least one of us understands. At least one of us is sorry. Really sorry. Are your brothers sorry? A pause. Greg is. He's been a mess since it happened. Keeps having panic attacks. Casey's angry, but he's also scared. He won't admit he's sorry, but he knows it was wrong. Terrence. Another pause. Terrence is still angry. He thinks you went too far, that you should be charged too. He doesn't get it yet, but he will. Eventually. Your father. Dad's ashamed. He won't say it, but I can tell. He's realized that he raised us to be like him, angry, entitled, violent. And now he's seeing what that created. We're moving to Tampa in 2 weeks. Getting away from here, starting over. Good. Mr. Hanna, I know you don't have any reason to believe me, but I'm going to change. I'm going to be better. What you did, it was a wake-up call. For me, at least. Then don't waste it, Derek said. Use this as a turning point. Get help. Get therapy. Make amends. And never, ever lay hands on another person in anger. I won't. I swear. After Bernard hung up, Derek sat in silence for a long time. He'd expected anger from the Spencers, maybe even retaliation. He hadn't expected remorse. Julian stopped by that evening, bringing Chinese takeout. Heard from my contacts at the PD, Julian said as they ate. The Spencer family is definitely leaving. House sold to a cash buyer, closing in 3 weeks. They're scrambling to get out. Bernard Spencer called me today, Derek said. Julian's chopsticks paused midair. Saying what? Derek recounted the conversation. Julian listened, his expression thoughtful. Think he was genuine? Julian asked. I do, actually. Terror can be a powerful teacher. For some people, it's the only thing that breaks through. And the others? Terrence is still defiant, according to Bernard. But he's also terrified. He won't risk coming near my family again. The others, Greg and Casey, are somewhere in between. Scared and maybe starting to understand. It's enough. The deposition is still on. Of course. Remorse doesn't erase consequences. They still need to pay, literally. But at least one of them learned something. The deposition was held at Diana Kaiser's law office, a sleek building downtown. The Spencer brothers arrived with their lawyer, a tired-looking man named Stuart Rutherford who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Derek sat across from them in the conference room, Christine beside him, Diana at the head of the table. The court reporter set up her equipment while everyone settled in. Terrence still had that defiant look, but his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. Greg wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Casey fidgeted constantly. Bernard looked at Derek once, briefly, and Derek saw genuine remorse there. The deposition took 4 hours. Diana was thorough, methodical, extracting every detail of what happened. The video evidence was played multiple times. Photographs of Marianne's injuries were presented. June's written statement was entered into the record. By the end, even Terrence looked defeated. The evidence was overwhelming. Their lawyer whispered to them during a break, and when they came back, Rutherford addressed Diana. My clients would like to discuss a settlement. I'm listening, Diana said. The final settlement was for $175,000, payable over 10 years. It would effectively bankrupt the Spencer family, especially combined with their legal fees and the cost of relocating. But it was justice of a sort. As they were leaving, Bernard approached Derek in the hallway. Thank you, Bernard said quietly. For what? For not killing us. For giving us a chance to be better. Derek studied him. Don't thank me. Thank Marianne, if you ever get the courage. She's the one who has to live with what you did. Bernard nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked away. That night, Derek told Marianne about the settlement and Bernard's apology. She listened quietly, processing. Do you believe he's sorry? She asked. I do, but that doesn't mean I forgive him. Forgiveness isn't mine to give, it's yours. I don't know if I can forgive him. Or any of them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's okay. You don't have to. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. If it helps you heal, do it. If it doesn't, don't. Either way, they're out of our lives now. 3 weeks later, the Spencer family was gone. A young couple with a baby moved into the house, friendly and normal. They introduced themselves to the Hannes, brought over a homemade pie, and were appropriately sympathetic when they learned what had happened with the previous owners. We're glad to have good neighbors, the husband said. Life slowly returned to normal. Marianne's nightmares became less frequent. She started going outside alone again, though she was always alert, always aware. Her therapist said that was natural, that she might always carry some wariness. But she was healing. June threw herself into school, channeling her anger and fear into straight A's and activism. She started a peer support group at her high school for students who'd experienced violence. Derek was proud of how both his daughters had responded to trauma by growing stronger, not breaking. Christine returned to her normal shifts, and Derek continued teaching. Sometimes in his classes on trauma management, he'd catch himself thinking about that night, about the precision of his actions, the clinical detachment he'd felt. It troubled him sometimes how easily he'd shifted into that mode, but also reassured him. He'd done what needed to be done, no more and no less. Julian stopped by one Saturday morning, 6 weeks after everything had settled. Got something for you, Julian said, handing Derek a folder. What's this? Background checks on the Spencer brothers. Figured you'd want to know. Derek opened it. Inside were detailed reports on all four. Terrence had a history of violence, multiple assault charges that had been dropped or pleaded down. Greg had been accused of domestic violence by an ex-girlfriend, but she'd recanted. Casey had been fired from 3 jobs for aggressive behavior. Bernard was the only one with a relatively clean record, though he'd been arrested once for underage drinking. They were escalating, Julian explained. What they did to Marianne wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. If you hadn't stopped them, they would have hurt someone else. Probably worse. Derek closed the folder. So I didn't just protect my daughter. I protected their next victim. Exactly. You did the right thing, brother. Never doubt that. After Julian left, Derek burned the folder in his backyard fire pit. He didn't need to keep that information. It was enough to know that his actions had been justified, that he'd prevented future violence. That night, the whole family had dinner together. Marianne had made lasagna, June set the table, and Christine poured wine for the adults, sparkling cider for the girls. To family, Christine said, raising her glass. To safety, June added. To justice, Marianne said quietly. To moving forward, Derek finished. They clinked glasses and ate, and for the first time in weeks, there was genuine laughter at the table. The trauma hadn't disappeared. It never would. Not completely, but they were learning to live with it, to integrate it into their story rather than let it define them. Later, as Derek tucked June into bed, she still let him do that sometimes. Even at 14, she asked him a question. Dad, if someone hurt me the way they hurt Marianne, would you do the same thing? Yes, he said without hesitation. Even though it was scary, even though it was violent, especially because of that. June, I hope you never have to make choices like I did. I hope you live in a world where people are kind and justice is swift and fair. But if that world fails you, if someone tries to hurt you, yes, I will protect you with everything I am. Every time, no matter what. She hugged him tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well. Months passed. The seasons changed. Winter came, blanketing Richmond in snow. The new neighbors became friends. The Hannas hosted a New Year's Eve party, their first social gathering since the attack. Marianne was accepted to 3 colleges, eventually choosing one in North Carolina, far enough away to feel independent, close enough to come home on weekends. She was majoring in psychology, hoping to help other trauma survivors. June continued her advocacy work, even testifying at a city council meeting about the need for better victim support services. Christine was promoted to charge nurse. More responsibility, but also more satisfaction. And Derek kept teaching, kept training the next generation of medics and paramedics. But he also started doing something new. He began offering free self-defense classes on weekends, teaching people how to protect themselves. The classes were popular, especially among women. He taught them the same principles he'd used that night. Precision over power, control over chaos, and always knowing your own limits. One day, as he was packing up after a class, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous. Mr. Hanna? I'm Bonita Mejia. I was assaulted last year. The guy got away with it. Charges dropped. But I heard about what you did, how you protected your daughter. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to be able to protect myself. Derek looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw, and saw his daughter. Saw every person who'd been victimized and told there was nothing they could do. Welcome to the class, he said. Let's make sure you're never helpless again. A year after that night, Derek sat on his porch with Christine, watching the sunset. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Inside, both daughters were home for spring break, laughing over some video on June's phone. Any regrets? Christine asked, the same question she'd asked that first night. Derek thought about it. About the Spencer brothers, wherever they were now. About the pain he'd caused. About the line he'd crossed and could never uncross. None, he said finally. I did what I had to do. What any father would do to protect his children. The only difference is that I had the training to do it effectively. You changed something that night, Christine said. Not just for us, but for others. All those people you're teaching now, you're giving them the same power you used. The power to protect themselves. It's the only good use for what I learned, Derek said. In combat, I saved lives. That night, I protected my family. Now, I'm helping others do the same. That's the legacy I want to leave. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Inside, their daughter's laughter rang out, the sound of healing, of resilience, of a family that had faced darkness and emerged stronger. Derek took Christine's hand, and they watched the stars come out one by one. He'd been a combat medic for 15 years. He'd saved hundreds of lives using his knowledge of anatomy, of the human body's fragility and strength. And when his daughter was hurt, when his family was threatened, he'd used that same knowledge in reverse. Not to kill, but to teach, to protect, to ensure that the ones who hurt her would never forget. The ambulance had taken 45 minutes that night. By then, all four Spencer brothers had been begging him to let them die, to end their pain. But he'd let them live, live with the memory, live with the consequences, live to become better, or at least to never hurt anyone again. And as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, Derek Hanna felt at peace with his choices. He'd been a healer, and then a protector, and finally, briefly, necessarily, a teacher of a darker lesson. But most importantly, he'd been a father, and he'd do it all again if he had to. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.